Welcome everybody to the Clements Library Bookworm. This is our 23rd episode. I'm Angela Unk, Director of Development at the Clements Library, and we're so happy to have you join us today. I don't have my stand today, so I'm sorry. I need to come up with some way to get myself organized here. All right. Just in case we have anybody brand new to the Bookworm, I want to give you a couple tips about Zoom. We'd love to have you continue to participate in the chat. I see many of you have already found the chat, so please continue to chime in. Select all panelists and attendees so we can all take part in the conversation. And you'll notice that the conversation goes by very quickly. So if you have questions, please place those in the Q&A section. There you can ask questions. You can also give someone else's question a little thumbs up, and that helps to sort the questions so we know which ones more people would like answered. And if we type any answers in, they can be posted with, or if you have answers or comments related to that question, go ahead and comment on them. My colleagues Ann Bennington-Helber and Tracy Payovich will be monitoring the chat and answering questions and posting links there. In addition, you'll notice that we have side-by-side mode enabled, so I can only control so many things about what you see. So you may want to play around with that a little bit depending on the size of your screen. You can drag it so that you can still see the speaker and the chat, but they're smaller and the slides are bigger. So play around with that a little bit as well. This program is brought to you by the William L. Clements Library on the campus of the University of Michigan. The Clements Library enables the discovery, learning, teaching, and sharing of American history through the collection, conservation, digitization, and availability of primary sources on paper. So we're really happy to have you here with us today. Today's episode will feature the sheet music collection from the Lynch archives. And so we're really excited to welcome Kevin Lynch today. And today's episode is generously sponsored by Sally Kennedy and Tom and Eleanor Sommerfeld. So thank you so much, Sally, Tom, and Eleanor. We really appreciate it. And if anyone else is interested in sponsoring an episode of the Bookworm, you can always contact myself or Ann Bennington-Helber. All right. Everybody who's signed on, if you have a chance to click really quickly, to participate in our poll, we were discussing a little bit whether or not we've purchased any items based on the cover or image rather than the contents themselves. And I'm just going to end the polling and share the results. So it seems like the designers for wine and beer have their work cut out for them, because that is the overall winner. And I think we've all done that, where we've said, oh, I'd like a Merlot. Oh, there's so many Merlots. I can't remember what I bought before. This one has great illustration. But books get a pretty high rating as well, with 67% of the people saying that. So, all right. Thanks so much, everybody, for participating in our poll today. Today, Clayton Lewis, the Clements Curator of Graphics, will be you'll be hosting a conversation with collector Kevin Lynch, who will share his private collection of sheet music, the Lynch archives, as we mentioned, highlighting rare and unique music. Title pages. Clayton oversees the Clements collection of historical prints, photographs, artwork, illustrated sheet music, and other visual materials. Clayton has authored numerous articles and has curated exhibits on vernacular photography, early racial satire, popular and patriotic music, wartime art, and American leisure travel. Thanks, Clayton, for hosting this today. And would you like to introduce Kevin?
Yes, thank you, Angela. I'd also like to point out that the success of these bookworms has been largely due to all the people that work behind the scenes, like Tracy and Ann and Angela, to make them go. And we're very grateful for all their efforts. But Kevin Lynch and I, we got to know each other at an American Historical Print Collectors Society meeting. And we started exchanging emails about sheet music collecting, and it's something that we have a mutual appreciation for. The Print Collectors Society is a wonderful organization of enthusiasts and professionals in the field of popular prints and visual culture. The meetings are always interesting and very sociable. It was at one of these meetings, Kevin, where you had a display of some of the high points from your collection, and it just knocked me out. So what was a music collector doing at a Print Collectors Society conference? And although the genre that Kevin collects is musical, I think we will discover today how important and compelling the visual iconography is. And Kevin's personal collection, which you can sample online at firstopic.com, is one of the premier private collections that I'm aware of. And inspired by his father's love of music and sheet music collecting, Kevin has greatly expanded this collection that he inherited to over 9,000 pieces of 18th and 19th century popular music. This now represents over 100 years of collecting. I've really been looking forward to this conversation. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you. And it's such a pleasure to be here. I can honestly say I wish to thank you, Clayton, Ann, Angela, and Tracy, all of you at the Clements, and everyone who's here today joining us. Thanks so much for coming. Also as well, a shout out to everyone at the Clements who keeps the archive going. Everyone who's contributed in the past. Our primary archives are so critical to our culture. And as I was thinking of this morning, I remembered a couple of lines from Shakespeare that say it all. It is actually from Julius Caesar. And here are the lines. Age cannot wither her, nor custom stale her infinite variety. These are lines from Enobarbus about Cleopatra. So he's speaking of Cleopatra, and he's saying that her legend is going to continue and that her image will never wither. But this speaks as well about our important prints and historical documents. So as much as we can keep them safe and secure, it's a great addition to the culture. So,
Kevin,
yeah.
The other day we were talking and you related an anecdote about the advice that you had been given by one of the greatest collectors in this field. And could you relate that story again, please?
Yes, I remember the evening vividly. I actually was in Brooklyn at the home of one of the great collectors of 19th century American music. And at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, I had to go to Queens. I'd never done this at rush hour on a Friday and meet with a fellow who had one of the great 20th century collections. So somehow I made it over there, and we went out to a Chinese restaurant, and he told me, pick one thing, just collect the one area, and that would be the best way to build your collection. So what I wound up doing, to mention infinite variety, I went for the broadest collection that I could possibly build. So not just you know, one subset, all subsets in American, many in British music publishing 19th century, and also European and around the world.
Thank you. I love that story. Yes, life would be easier if we were only interested in one thing.
The infinite variety, you know, does put us right there in terms of illustrated music, particularly in the 19th century when lithography was growing. And you had many wonderful artists who were working on these music designs, title page illustrations. And you also had very high quality paper, rag paper, basically cotton. And you also had wonderful inks that were, you'll see in some of the chromolithographs here. Why is it that we collect music? Well, the first slide we're looking at here gives you an idea. It's evocative. So you could collect the title, "From the Ruins Our City Shall Rise," but wouldn't it be better if there was an illustration accompanying it to make it pop, to bring it to life? And so you see here an image of the burned city of Chicago, 1871. That composer, George F. Root, was a significant composer in the century. He wrote the first song once the Civil War began. The first gun is fired. That was George F. Root. He also wrote Battle Cry of Freedom, another one of the popular songs from the war. This is found apparently, according to the World Catalog, the online catalog for the Library of Congress, only found at the Newberry Library in Chicago. However, here you see another copy, and there are others floating around as well. So this gives you an idea of some of the iconography. Here, a tinted litho with an inset, an oval inset of a picture post-fire, Chicago. Mindel lithography. And here, moving along, we have, I'm going to show you some illustrations here of some of the 19th century disasters that were very well known because they did often have very eye-opening illustrations. And this one in particular, very rare piece. This is the Brooklyn Fire. Sadly, 278 people died in this fire. I believe it is the only interior view of a disaster on American music. So that gives you an insight into some of the various things we look for. Does this appear anywhere else? Look at the license that the illustrator took with the title. Once the title was set in type, he took it and he set it on fire, literally. And then right below it, you'll see to the right is the fire phantom as debris falls from the wings. Look down on the stage to the left, the young girl, that's Kate Claxton. She became a fairly well-known actress in New York. And this, by the way, the Brooklyn Fire was published in Boston. You can see at the bottom, Oliver Ditson. It was an example of fire exits not being what they should be. There was only one exit for all of the balconies, and that's where everyone got trapped. Tragic story, but evocatively brought to life by the illustration. The artist is unknown. Here, you've got a couple of very interesting pieces, and we're going now into the bolder color. The Fireman's Quadrille on the left. What is that? That is New York's Crystal Palace that is burning. But wait a second here, the copyright date, I checked it again last night, 1854. The Crystal Palace did not burn till 1858. Either the lithographer had a premonition, that was amazing, or the title, The Fireman's Quadrille, was initially copyrighted with a different cover in 1854, And then whoever held the copyright, I believe it was Samuel Joly in New York, reissued the piece in October of 1858 when the Crystal Palace burned. It's interesting that they make it a night scene. I think the Crystal Palace burned during the day. Everyone did escape. No lives were lost. The dome collapsed within 15 minutes. And the entire place, built mostly of glass and iron, burned to the ground in 25 minutes. Rather extraordinary. The composer, Julien, Louis-Antoine Julien, very well-known composer of polkas and other dance pieces, was also a great band leader. Unfortunately, he ended in a very, very sad and tragic fire in London that burned all of his manuscripts and destroyed many of his lithographic plates. He wound up in Paris, dying penniless in an insane asylum. So quite the story you see that the composer and the lithographer are part of, and that is a story of American British history. On the right, Fire Fiend, this is the burning of Pike's Opera House in Cincinnati, published in Cincinnati, 1866. There is another beautiful piece of sheet music that shows you Pike's Opera House when they completed it. Very pretty piece. So as completists, we'd like to have both. As music collectors, we'd like to have the Pike Opera House horizontal piece and then the vertical Fire Fiend piece as it burned. By the way,
I presume you're looking for the first piece of the Pike Opera House?
I have it. I do
You
have
it. Okay.
Oh, yes. Very nice copy of it. But get this. Fire Fiend, if you look on World Catalog, this Fire Fiend is only found at one library. Would you believe it's the Clements? But before we send Clayton scurrying off to search for it, the publisher re-released it with a totally different illustration. So you may find out that that's what the Clements has. And that is a picture of the burning of the Lindell Hotel in St. Louis. Totally different situation. But you can see how publishers, once they owned the copyright, could re-release the piece with a very different image and very different setting.
So a quadrille, of course, is a dance, and many of these 19th century popular music pieces are dances or instrumentals without lyrics. Is that correct?
That's right, and a great many dance pieces were published. They were very popular, not just the polka in this country in the 1840s, but a great many marches and quick steps, this and that, quadrilles. A schottisch, that was a very popular dance piece. So along with the ballads, there were a great many dance pieces published. Before we leave this, I do want to add the original Crystal Palace, right? 1851, Prince Albert in London, the spectacular exhibition. That originally was in Hyde Park, moved to Sydenham in North London, and that burned, again, made of glass and steel. That burned in a spectacular nighttime fire in the 1930s. So you can see how all of this ties together. This is history, and it's brought to life with these evocative covers. Now we've moved from fire to flood. This is arguably the most famous flood in our history. The Johnstown flood of 1889 is such an amazing story. We don't have time for today, but a fellow by the name of Daniel Peyton was actually at the dam. It was an earthen and rock dam in the Little Conemaugh River in Pennsylvania, and he was there when it started to give way. And he actually got on his horse and started riding down the valley warning people. And he was crisscrossing on bridges, the Conemaugh River, Little Conemaugh. He alerted the SOS operator. she began sending out the signals. She was still there, sending SOS when she got swept away by the flood. Peyton made it all the way down to the last bridge. Crossing the last bridge, he did not make it. 2,200 people died, spectacular tragedy, but like many of the tragedies in the 19th century, they gave rise to progressive changes and improvements. But you can see how effective this is. I mean, it actually gives you a picture of the flood coming down and children clinging to things and the mother crying from the shore. You know, I mean, wow, this really brings it to life. So we're going to move here a little bit, and we may go back and forth and pick up a couple of other disasters, but I did want to share from my archive some of the suffrage pieces, and this is a wonderful item, Woman's Rights, a right good ballad, rightly illustrating women's rights, music and poetry. Up top, and you can see the dedication, and it's been pulled out here by Anne over to the right, dedicated without permission to Mrs. Oakwood Smith and Mrs. Amelia Bloomer of the Bloomer costume. And then down at the bottom, the composer Kate Horn, underneath it, parenthetically, it says, not one of the Women's Rights Convention. So it's a satirical piece. And there were a number of those that represented the other side of things. There were a great many people that fought against women getting the vote, of course. Let's move on and see what else we have here.
I love the typography in this one and in all these pieces, but that's a spectacular example of the varied typography of the 19th century, most of which was designed for the individual covers.
Yes, fellow's name was Dunbar, and it's an engraving. And you can see the different fonts that he used, how effective it was. A beautiful poster quality sheet music print. The year is 1853. And by the way, this followed a rather unruly convention in New York, one of the first national women's rights conventions. So it may have to do with that. 1853. We'll talk more about Amelia Bloomer in a little bit. So here we go. This one is incredible. This is a wonderful suffrage piece. Does not have a spectacular cover. Does tell you that it was sung with great applause by Madam Anna Bishop, and she was very famous as a concert singer and in opera. She did it in a very famous elopement. She ran off with the harpist. Have you ever thought of doing that? Nicholas Boxa was a very famous harpist. His music compositions for harp are quite collectible. But what's really valuable about this are the lyrics. So it isn't just the art. It's not artistic merit that draws the eye. It's not just historical relevance, but the lyrics. And if I may, can I just read briefly a few of these lyrics? They're too good not to read. Here we go. Men tell us 'tis fit that wives should submit to their husbands submissively, meekly, that whatever they say, their wives should obey, unquestioning, stupidly, weakly. Our husbands would make us their own dictum take, without ever a wherefore or why for it, but I don't, and I can't, and I won't, and I shan't, but I will speak my mind if I die for it. How about that for boldness? Incredible, isn't it? There are so many different things that speak with a music publication. And so we have to look at all of it, you know. Okay.
You know, one of the things that I've always tried to remind people in the reading room of the Clements is that the popular music is a measure of what was on the public consciousness. So if there is sheet music being published about women's rights, this is something that was very broadly on the public's mind, and that there was an audience for it, not just to purchase the music, but an audience to receive those ideas.
That's very true, and we only wish that the publishers would have taken a few more risks and released, let's say, a sheet music publication with Elizabeth Cady Stanton on the cover, or Susan B. Anthony, one of the great suffrage leaders. To the best of my knowledge, they don't exist on American Music in Portraiture. Neither does Lucy Stone, neither does Lucretia Mott, neither does Harriet Tubman, the great Black activist, or Sojourner Truth. The publishers did not want to split the buying demographic, did not want to make people irate, and obviously it was a very divisive subject. But now we're skipping forward here to 1913, I believe, for this piece. And once again, very rare piece. On the World Catalog, it's not found in America. It is only found at the British Library, St. Pancras. It is nice to see, written by Zena Hahn, of which I've been able to find out nothing, but you see here pictured, beautiful fashion in this photograph, the Flatiron Building in the background. So Clayton, you're saying Fifth Avenue in Manhattan?
I think so.
And also in very nice condition, by the way, which is always a huge factor in any collectible, isn't it? So the women are in white. And this year, of course, was the 100th anniversary of women getting the vote, finally gaining enfranchisement. And we are celebrating that this year. In fact, a friend of mine here in Seattle just appeared in a film that's been released, and played a significant character in one of these marches. So it's out there. Let's celebrate. What's the next slide here? I can't wait. All right. So among the many heroines in the suffrage struggle, there were a great many other heroines, women who performed fantastic deeds. And one of the interesting ones that appeared on a sheet music cover, this is also very rare. I mean, this, on the World Catalog, this is only found at the University of Nebraska, Kearney, and it tells the story of a famous Nebraska blizzard. It's called Song of the Great Blizzard, 1888, 13 were saved, or Nebraska's Fearless Maid. On the inside cover is the story. It's the whole story on the inside cover. Minnie Freeman, a school teacher, and what happened is that this day in January in 1888 dawned clear. I believe it was maybe 30 degrees Fahrenheit. The temperature fell 50 degrees in a matter of hours, and an incredible storm came in. All the kids were at the schoolhouse, and in fact, many of those, the vast majority, I believe, of those that died that day were children. They were simply trapped. In this case, what happened as Minnie Freeman began her day of instruction, she noticed one of the children was fiddling with a ball of twine. Well, it's just like a distraction today of a cell phone. So Minnie grabbed the ball of twine. Very important. As the storm set in, the door blew in, the windows blew in, and the roof started blowing off. At that point, she thought of the ball of twine. And for that reason, a number of them lived to see the end of the day. She took the twine, tied all the kids together, tied them to herself, grabbed the youngest one in her arms, you can see here, and headed out the door. They were 3/4 of a mile from the nearest house. and it may have been as cold as 10 or 20 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. So it was an incredible adventure, which ended with all of them surviving. And it is a famous story of survival in Nebraska's history. So I wanted to take a little extra time with this to
tell us about the number 4 in the star that appears on not only on this cover, but on many of these covers.
Right, in the lower right, you see that, and pulled out here again, which is great. 4 represents the price. So this would have been sold in 1888 for 40 cents. And it is interesting to watch the price of music move through the 19th century. In the early years, 20 cents was common, so you would have a 2 in the star, or a 2.5, which would be 25 cents. More on this as we get to a piece later in the screensaver here.
It's not a small amount of money for the time. That was, in the era of a 5-cent meal, that's a fair amount of money.
It was because back then, I mean, even mid-century, to compare to today, you have to multiply what the dollar would buy today as opposed to then. You have to multiply by about 30. So the color pieces were typically 40 cents, 50 cents, sometimes 75 cents. Some of the longer compositions that ran to 20 pages or more might be $1. So $30, I'm so glad I got this. We did visit Providence, Rhode Island, those of us with the American Historical Print Collectors Society, just a year ago. Was it really? A little over a year ago. And I think I may have seen the boat in this picture in a museum there. This is an image of Ida Lewis. Ida Lewis, I was going to say manned the lighthouse. Ida Lewis stalked the lighthouse and took care of it for almost 50 years. Her father was a lighthouse keeper, and she sort of inherited the position, but she was spectacular in her ability to perform these rescues and save lives when someone was lost at sea or a boat had overturned or what have you. Ida saved between 18 and 25 lives during the course of her career. And the astonishing thing about this music publication, it tells you right at the top under her name, she is here seen in costume as in the rescue of March 29th, 1869. This is actually what she was wearing. She had a cold that day. Her mother called out to her that 2 militiamen from Fort Adams, I believe, were in the water. The boat had apparently overturned, and Ida ran out the door, didn't even bother to put her shoes on or a coat, grabbed her little brother into the boat. She got, rowed out, and saved the lives of both militiamen. And this is what she was wearing. So here you have a moment in time, a spectacular bit of American history, and a heroine that would have been forgotten, except that we have this music publication. So, this is why we present, this is why we exhibit. Now, Nellie Bly. I was lucky enough with my own business to get to help market the world premiere of the musical about Nellie Bly. We did it here at Village Theater outside of Seattle some years back. It was a wonderful musical. And it tells the story of her life. What an amazing life this woman had. You can't forget her once you hear about her. She actually began by walking into Joseph Pulitzer's office at the New York World, Pulitzer of the Pulitzer Prize, and convincing him that there was a great story he should publish about the New York City asylums and what terrible condition they were in. She told him, commit me to the asylum and come back and get me in a week and I'll have the whole story, which is actually what happened. It was an incredible scandal. and was a coup for the New York World. So then, following that, she went back to Pulitzer and said, look, Jules Verne has published Around the World in 80 Days. Why don't you send me around the world, paying my way, of course, and I'll report from all of the larger cities around the world. It'll be a tremendous ongoing story for you in the New York World for 2 or 3 months. So he did that. This piece commemorates that event. You can see at the top of the page, if you can read it, all previous records broken, 72 days, 6 hours and 11 minutes. So Nellie Bly beat Jules Verne's fictional account of 80 Days Around the World by about 7 days. So another great example of sheet music capturing a moment in American history. Okay.
And of course, that the music is a gallop, which is totally suitable to the subject, right? A gallop being a fast tempo instrumental piece.
Yes, and a gallop, like a schottische, for some reason was spelled different ways. So you'll see it G-A-L-O-P, G-A-L-O-P-P for some reason, maybe even G-O-L. And schottische had an E or it didn't, depending. This piece here is a pretty seminal item. This is the first feminist illustrated piece of music in American history. And this dates, would you believe, all the way back to 1838. So this is 10 years before the famous initial meeting in Seneca Falls, upstate New York at the foot of the Finger Lakes. That famous meeting with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and her Declaration of Sentiments. I have to tell you, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, you must read her. Spectacular writer, incredible woman, raised 5 kids, I believe it was, and with Susan B. Anthony, before she died, did a 9-volume set of their entire fight for equality, all levels of equality and equal opportunity in addition to getting the vote. In any case, this is 10 years prior, 1838. I believe it's an Endicott lithograph, and it is a wonderfully fun song, I'll Be No Submissive Wife, and it had multiple additions to it down the road.
This piece on the cover, there is a retail stamp at the very bottom that
Yes.
Anna's called out. I personally find these to be an interesting way to track the history of the individual objects and how they were acquired.
Yeah, and as we were talking about the other day, Clayton, you can see there with the address of the retail outlet. This is Millet's Music Saloon. Very interesting name for a music store, but it also gives his address. So if this piece did not have a copyright, it does. The copyright is down at the bottom, but if it didn't, you can help date it by looking at the retail outlet address. Now, Millet was a publisher, I believe, as well. So we have a book with publishers' addresses, Harry Dichter's Handbook of Early American Sheet Music, and that's very, very helpful for dating 19th century music. So now we're moving on, and these are a couple of the beautifully done bloomer pieces, and you can see this is a Turkish costume. Amelia Bloomer did not design it. She simply wore it as a political statement. And for once, a woman's ankles were being revealed. Also, the pant underneath the dress is tapered there, and that was a new design for women. And it was a way of saying we'll wear what we want to wear when we want to wear it. But there are a number of very beautiful lithographs, typically printed in color. Sometimes they're hand colored, and sometimes you have a mixture of both. And we may be looking at that here. It is sometimes hard to tell, but hand coloring was commonly mixed into color prints on music illustrations. This one on the left was also distributed down in New Orleans by William Mayo, who was a well-known New Orleans music publisher. On the right, this is a New York publication. That is a Sarony lithograph on the right. And what an attractive gown, I would say. Dedicated to Amelia Bloomer, once again, who's one of the suffragettes who should be studied more. She was the one who introduced Susan B. Anthony to Elizabeth Cady Stanton in Seneca Falls, I believe 1850. So Susan B. Anthony was not at that first meeting in 1848. Frederick Douglass was, the great Black orator. He was there. But Amelia Bloomer was also the writer and the editor of the first suffrage periodical called The Lily. Here's another image of a Bloomer, and what a gorgeous one and what a rare one. And what wonderful condition. Look at, you'll never see this. You'll never see this period, but especially not in this condition.
I've noticed this one, and many sheet music covers from the 19th century have evidence of binding along the side.
Very good, Clayton. We should point that out. So much of what exists now in this condition does so because it was protected, it was bound. The person who owned the music bound their personal collection in what is called a Sammelband. It's a German term, Sammelband. And much of what was in these bound volumes has been disbound, but was protected long enough that you can see some of these issues have little to no foxing or staining on them. That's because the paper was not made from wood pulp. It was made from rags, desiccated rags. And so it's known as rag paper, essentially cotton paper. The cotton paper did a beautiful job of taking the ink and absorbing it. And so the colors can just pop out sometimes. But Anne has pulled out for us on the right this lovely looking parasol. What is that? That is not going to protect this woman from rain or shine. It's one of the curiosities of sheet music design is the lithographers had the liberty to do whatever they want. This again, I believe, is Napoleon Sarony. I think that's right.
One of the top lithographers in the United States. Yeah.
Yes, he was ubiquitous along with John Bufford from Boston, Sarony from New York. By the way, it's pronounced Sarony, Napoleon Sarony. I was lucky enough to develop a friend in the music collecting business in Quebec. And Sarony was from Quebec and was French Canadian. And he told me, Pierre Nadon told me that it's pronounced Sarony, but Sarony and Bufford each did maybe as many as 1,000 illustrations or more. So you'll see those names coming up commonly. Here we have a very similar pose with a slightly larger parasol. Still, it looks like it's simply ornamental and not really meant to function.
You know, I think it was used to protect their face from the sun, but clearly not much else.
No, not much else. But this is a wonderful design, a tinted lithograph. And this is by Duval, his steam lithography. And you know what? It's James Queen. James Queen was one of the best lithographers of the century. He was very well known. And we see in the background here, the publisher's retail outlet. So this is published in Philadelphia by Lee and Walker. That's their establishment in the background. And in the foreground, this is meant to be Amelia Bloomer. It is dedicated to her sister, Lydia Bloomer, but it also exists with a dedication at top to Amelia. So I think it is meant to be her. Here you get two subsets. The Bloomer subset collecting subset. And then also you have the sheet music establishment collecting subset. And they're both represented in this tinted lithograph.
How often do you see these self-referential covers with the music store or the publisher's building as part of the illustration?
Oh gosh, I think there must be 40 or 50 at least. Most of the prominent music publishers wound up doing a music piece that gave their store a little publicity. And some of them feature in some rather rare and important pieces. All of us, frankly, that are longtime sheet music collectors, we're always after these pieces. They're attractive and they, again, really capture a time in American music publishing history.
One of the things I've noticed from these covers is the stores are big. These are not small operations. They're big.
They are. And of course, as you walked into one of these establishments, the whole idea was to catch the eye. I mean, Allure had to be functioning here to sell the music. And that's why we have so many evocative covers on popular American music, where the popular music composer may not be well known. If it was classical and you were marketing Beethoven or Mozart, they were so well known you didn't need the illustrated title page, right? Unless it was a first edition. So here we have some very bright and beautiful images of the incredible Jenny Lind, who was so incredible and developed such a mania. She eventually came to be referred to as the Lind. And that's how people talked about her. And her astonishing tour of America followed her conquering of Europe and England as well. She hailed from Stockholm, Sweden. Her story is so incredible, I could go on for an hour talking about Jenny Lind. It is her bicentennial this year. In fact, it's next month. So 200 years ago, she was born. Here you see a beautiful tinted lithograph. And to give you an idea of how people held Jenny in such high regard because of her moral standing, because of her spectacular voice and musicianship, and because of her unbelievable philanthropy. You have this image of Jenny driving the horses of the sun, Apollo's chariot, across the sky, and it suggests the subtitle, which is "The World is Wakening into Light." So that is a great image for this morning. It has dawned here on Whidbey Island, and so the light maybe is a little different on my face right now. We are dealing with the smoke and have been, but indeed, the world is once again wakening into light. I love this. And then you can see on the right hand some of the detail that the lithographer put into this. I believe this is once again Sarony in New York. Don't have it. It's Sarony. So this is actually a 10-page composition. Here again, you can see some of the beautiful costumes that Jenny wore. And part of what you see is the ink's saturation into the paper. So this is a very important point. The quality of the paper was critical, as well as the inks, as well as the quality of the artistry. In music collecting, the veteran collectors always see historical relevance as the overriding point of building prominence. Historical relevance, the social, cultural anthropology. What does it say about America, about Americans, about our history, our culture? That's the most important point. But behind that, adjacent to it, is artistic merit in design. And here you can see some beautifully designed pieces. So it isn't just the glory of the costume here, it's how the lithographic artist created the design. I mean, you've got a sketch in the background here on the left, and then a very bright image of Jenny in the foreground. And then in the right, her in costume. And I think both are printed in color, but there may be additional hand coloring in one or both. Jenny Lind, her spectacular tour with P.T. Barnum as her impresario, her music promoter, was an unbelievable success, the greatest tour in American history, and I recommend you study it. Furthermore, we need a film. We need a film on Jenny Lind that tells the true story of what happened with her. Her philanthropy was beyond belief. She literally donated everything she made on a 1.5-year American tour, which was equivalent, I believe, going from memory, in today's dollars, about $5.5 million. Gave it all to charity, primarily to build schools in her home of Sweden for indigent children, for kids who had no parents, who had little money. And so she had an incredible heart. But to give everything away at 90 years of age is laudable. To give it away at 60 is incredible. But to give it away at 30 years of age, as she did, and trust that you were going to be fine. A tremendous model of philanthropy for today's young donors. Okay, here we have a wonderful image of Jenny. Again, look at the condition. Good Lord, looks like it was made last year. Tinted lithograph, the only litho of Jenny on music that shows her when she was young with braids. It is actually a famous painting of her taken from that. Beautiful. This is a little composite I did, the only one I've ever done. And I took this engraving by Rankmore, which itself is based on a painting by Magnus. And I added to it tobacco cards of Jenny Lind, and then a little sticker in the upper left, and then a Swedish note, Swedish currency, 50 kroner down in the bottom. So Jenny's still remembered on Swedish currency today. And of all the things that were created with Jenny Lind's name, the Jenny Lind crib is still out there. But they sold everything from cribs to cigars with her name on it. She was that popular. I got this last month. Wonderful piece. Liberty is immortal. Try and find another copy of this. Impossible. The words and the music were by a very interesting fellow, Paul de Longpre. He was a very well-known watercolorist, and he actually moved in the 1890s to California and settled in Hollywood, of all places, in the 1890s. This piece cost me $35 to purchase. It was initialed by Paul de Longpre. He did the image of the flag. It's down in the lower left there under the flag. But Paul de Longpre's watercolors can sell for as much as $35,000. So it kind of gives you an idea here of how rarity plays. This is not necessarily unique, but is almost certainly a single-digit rarity. $35. Unbelievable. So this is a field you can get into and start your collections without going broke. Hopefully.
I think that's an important point. Is the collecting of historical lithographs can get expensive, but it seems to me that the same quality of printing, and in some cases the very same publishers, are available on sheet music covers at a much different market.
Yes. Now, I started my collection on eBay, and that was 1997 that I really got going, and eBay was only formed in 1995. So those were the early days on eBay, and what is available now is not anything like what was available then. But there were many, many very inexpensive lithographs that were offered, and occasionally something will pop up. This one I actually got in trade. Took me forever to find this. I looked for 20 years for this, very rare. Undine was one of the spectacular extravaganzas that came up after the Civil War. And you can see this is a stage production in which the producer spent God knows how much. I mean, look, there's 20 some people right here in this image on stage. And this is a beautiful lithograph by Chicago Lithography. Where's the artist signature? It's not there. It was standard practice for lithographic shops to not allow the artist to sign. And even some of the greats that wound up becoming well-known painters, like Winslow Homer, who did a dozen sheet music designs when he was an apprentice for Bufford in Boston. Even Homer was not allowed to sign everything. He had to hide his initials in the grass in one case. Why that was, I don't know, but it is very true. You'll know who the lithographic office is, but not necessarily the artist.
This cover has, on one side, it mentions a polka. On the other side, it mentions a waltz. Were these two different pieces within the same cover?
No, they were separate, so you had to purchase both. They would have quite likely the same lithographic cover to them. By the way, as you open this up, this is the lithographed title page. A title page, it's called, because there's no music. When you open it up, the inside cover is going to be blank, more than likely, and the music will start on page 3. And the music is almost certainly going to be engraved, not lithographed. They just had, engraving gave you an explicit look with musical notation. So you'll see the engraved plate stamped on much of 19th century music, but that is for the music on the inside. And generally speaking, the illustrative covers were lithographs. Lithographs being planographic printing, very, very fine surface, very, very finely sanded, 70-pound limestone slabs, many of them coming from Bavaria, from Solenhofen, where they were initially discovered. Lithographs wound up being more efficient to use, more economical. You could get more prints from them before they started to fail. So they were an advancement over engraving in that way. Here we have another extravaganza. This one dates 1866, the year after the Civil War ended. Undine, a year later in Chicago, 1867. But this is the famous Black Crook production. This is the first Broadway blockbuster in New York. 1866. It was enormously popular. Black Crook being a black magician who had a crooked back. Black Crook. It's actually an old British expression. And it was an unbelievable show that ballooned in size once the producers realized that a wonderful company of Parisian dancers were suddenly unemployed in New York as the theater in which they were performing in burned. So they were suddenly available, and the producer simply threw them into the show. Initially, apparently not telling the playwright, the gentleman who wrote the piece, the melodrama, and later he had to square with him. But this is the March of the Amazons, and is just a huge event on stage with tremendous costuming and sets. The play ran 5.5 hours, the musical. And eventually, I believe it was shortened to about 4 hours. There were also lots of skimpily clad dancers that wound up bringing in the crowds, as well as the beautiful imagery. All right, so we don't have a lot of images of Blacks on American music that are not derogatory. Minstrel music being what it was, so stereotypic, in many cases, racist. And there were some, but very few, that were not derogatory in nature in the images presented. And this is one of them, Song of the Negro Boatman, another very rare piece, extremely difficult to find in this condition. You can see the gentleman in the boat smiling and pointing. In the background, the Union forces. This is 1862. We're still, we haven't hit the middle of the war yet, but there is a comfort, and maybe there is a premonition of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address in the following year and the freeing of the slaves. The words are by John Greenleaf Whittier, famous American poet. And the lithograph is particularly well done, not signed, sadly. There is a nice pullout here to the right. You can see on the right, look at the little pullout. What's hanging down on the left is a string. That's not a tear. In the lithograph, I'm fairly certain that is a piece of string, he said, looking at it again. I'll have to look at the original, but it's been disbound. You can see the disbinding marks on the left-hand side. All right, so here, we're nearly done now. So hang in there, but we've got some beauties still to show you. And look at this. Is this not impressive? This is British, published in London. The lithographer is John Brandard. He likely worked on it himself. And he was very well known, one of the top lithographers for music publications in Britain. 1846. This is a lithograph that's part of a gift book of music called The Musical Bijou. There was another one called The Queen's Boudoir that Brandard did the lithographs for. He, in fact, did the first litho on music in the English-speaking world in 1841, just 5 years prior. Everything that you see here that is gold is actually bronzing, gold gilding, and when the light hits it, it just lights up. And this piece in particular has beautiful bronzing on it, plus great detail, and you can see the complexity. This is not even 10 years after music color printing came to the front. So there were no color prints on music, certainly no chromolithographs, I should say, on music until 1837. Godefroy and Holmendel in England did the initial ones, and William Sharp in America in the late 1830s, the first color lithograph, chromolithograph. All right, we're going to bounce back to 1815 to 1818, the publication of the Love Letter, which is the first piece of sheet music that represented postal interest, philately, and stamp collecting. And this piece is quite rare, very difficult to find, now more than 200 years old. But you can see the marks of the passage of time. There is some foxing, there's some grime on the right-hand side, perhaps where they turned the page. There's a little bit of foxing at the bottom, and there's a tear, a repaired tear at the bottom that goes through the first 3 lines of music. So the vagaries of the passage of time. What's
Wonderful.
next? Yes, so here, very important piece. I believe this is the second piece of music published in the state of California. The year is 1852. We do know that the publisher, Joseph Atwill, who came from New York in 1849, he published the first piece, same publisher. And we know that because of a nota bene comment on the first piece of music, The California Pioneers, and it says, "This is the first piece of music published in California." Well, this is the same publisher, it's the same year, copyrighted 1852, and these are the only two known to exist California publications on music with a copyright from the year of 1852, or that can be dated that early. This one's particularly important because of the way it captures the early years in San Francisco. You have the iconic imagery of the California bear, top right, with Columbia. That's been pulled out by Anne to the right of the main image. And then in the center, the central vignette is of a couple of gold miners there working their trade, and you have the California bald eagle, and then at the bottom, an image of what is probably San Francisco Bay. It's interesting for so many different reasons. Tinted lithograph by Britton and Ray. That would be Eduardo Ray, is it Fernando Ray, a very important California lithographic group. This was also published in concert with B.F. Butler Lithography, also a well-known group. But if you look at the top, arranged from the most favorite Negro melodies in the pianoforte, or for the pianoforte. What do they mean, Negro melodies? Well, these were the first Stephen Foster melodies published in the state of California. And Stephen, in the year of 1852, was doing a number of minstrel pieces that referred back to the Black experience in America. And that's what this refers back to. It's interesting, of those several melodies printed in here, you don't have O Susanna. Where is O Susanna? If everyone sang this on the way to the California gold fields as we were taught in school, surely O Susanna would be one of these melodies, but it is not. It is 4 other Stephen Foster melodies.
Kevin, can I just interrupt for a second? We have
Yes.
so many good questions, and I just want to tell everybody we will get to them. I know we're running over, but your collection is so amazing. But one of the questions is, what is foxing? And we keep talking about that, so I thought maybe you could comment on that.
Essentially just staining. Although you can have water stains, like there's one on the left, upper left, that looks like a water stain, and then you have these little marks, these little dots. That's what foxing is. It's staining. It's essentially just the paper breaking down.
Thank you.
Almost done. This one's a gorgeous one. Again, it's John Brainerd. It's British. And once again, you can see the complexity of some of Brainerd's designs from the late 1840s, how rapidly, once we had the advent of color printing, how rapidly the lithographers mastered it. By the late 1840s, they were doing pieces like this. Just astounding how many color plates may have been used. This is the Triangle Fire, and I heartily recommend you should check public broadcasting, because they did a beautiful, very affecting film on the Triangle Fire in New York. It was one of the things that spurred the vote to give women the vote, because in 1911, when this occurred, it was the result of some horrible things that were going on in the undergarment industry. And in this case, the owners of the building had locked escape doors. And the women who were working for them were not able to escape when the fire started. I believe this killed about 130 young women, many of whom were young Jewish women, also young Irish women. You can see at the bottom, it is the Hebrew Publishing Company. They did hundreds of pieces of music early in the 20th century. The Columbus Day Waltz is, of course, the Great Chicago World's Fair, the Columbian Exhibition, 1893, 400th anniversary of Columbus discovering America. His ships in the background there, beautiful pastel coloring. Akil, what was the lithographer's name? Akil Nolika. I think it was the only litho that he did on music, but a very pretty piece for the Chicago World's Fair. All right, so we have to have one, don't we, that has no illustration, no pictorial illustration, but a very important piece of American music. This is the first edition, the Battle Hymn of the Republic. It says down there, Mrs. Dr. S.G. Howe. Julia Ward Howe, who's been lionized for this composition, basically a rewrite of Glory Hallelujah, the John Brown song. She wrote the lyrics. She was in the Willard Hotel upstairs in Washington, D.C., which still exists. And amazingly, 100 years later, in the lobby of the same hotel, Martin Luther King writes, "I Have a Dream." That speech, walks down the street to the Lincoln Monument and delivers it. 100 years apart, same hotel. And if you go to that hotel today, to show you how history ties together various threads, they have a Jenny Lind suite in the Willard Hotel. And if you wish to stay there, as I do, it'll set you back about $3,000. I checked into it per night. So anyway, very famous publication here. Can I point out one more thing before we go forward? Under Atlantic Monthly, a little star, there's the price. Oh boy, you better look and see what that price is. If it's 2.5, 25 cents. That's the initial state of first edition. If it is a 3, 30 cents. That's the second state of first edition. And the difference between the two at auction can be massive. So it shows you initial state of first edition is what everyone wants in every field.
Thank you. Oh my goodness. You have such amazing items. And as we talked about before, this is just the tip of the iceberg, but this has been amazing, amazing. So thank you everybody for sticking with us. It's a little longer today, but Kevin is happy to continue to answer questions. So we will do that shortly. I just want to do a couple of housekeeping slides first. Our October 16th bookworm will be The Papers of William H. Busby, Civil War soldier and newspaper editor. This is really going to be a unique and interesting bookworm, because one of the things that we'll talk about, in addition to Busby's amazing life, is how his papers were dispersed and how they've started to come back together. So that's our panelists will all have a stake in some different parts of the collection, and that should be really fun. So join us for that. Then we will start our fall virtual Discover series coming up on September 30th. And this will be in plain sight, looking for women's history in the archives. So on September 23rd, I apologize, I'm looking at the wrong part of the slide, but it continues for 3 sessions. So you only have to sign up once, and then you are registered for all 3 sessions. And like the bookworm, if you are unable to watch all 3 sessions, everybody who's registered will still get an email with a link to the recording and any resources that are mentioned. So we hope you join us for that as well. Speaking of which, you will get an email from us later today with the recording and links to resources. And if you have missed any of the bookworms, you can also find those online at the Clements website. We began the bookworm as a way to keep in touch with everybody. And we're so grateful that you continue to sign in and participate. As you know, this pandemic has really shifted some of our priorities and made us rethink how we do things. And we're really ramping up our digitization efforts and other kinds of virtual programs, because we know that even when we welcome people back to the building, this is a wonderful way to tell stories and talk with people like Kevin, who's in Seattle, and continue to tell these wonderful stories of American history. So if you are able to donate to the Clements Library, we really appreciate it, and we'll put your money to good use. As well, if you are interested in sponsoring an episode of the Bookworm, we're always excited to have people do that as well. So I will thank Sally Kennedy and Tom and Eleanor Sommerfeld again for sponsoring today's episode. We also have other fall programming, various lectures coming up, so take a look at those as well. All right, back to the Q&A. Let's see, it looks like we have a variety of questions. Tom is asking, were any sheet music covers considered scandalous in their day?
Well, depending on how you looked at it, again, some of the, the Bloomer publications raised a furor. And there's one I can think of, oh my gosh. Oh, to answer your question, how about this one? 1868, 3 years after Lincoln's assassination, Our Brutus gets published. It lionizes John Wilkes Booth, Lincoln's assassinator. It is literally disseminated in the Capitol, blocks from the Capitol building. Can you believe that? On Pennsylvania Avenue, 3 years after the assassination. The federal troops came down and destroyed everything that they can find. There are now 5 complete copies known to exist, and a couple of other cover only. So that's a great example for you right there.
Let's see, Jane is asking, can you talk a little about the distribution and use? How big were the runs of these titles, and how do you determine popularity or how people interacted with them?
Oh, that's a really interesting question, Kevin.
It is. It would require a long answer, and it would require more knowledge than I have as well. But some of them had very small print runs. I will tell you that. And in many cases, we have many, many items, which are clearly single-digit rarities, where not only less than 10 are known to exist, but less than 10 are assumed to exist. But in some cases, popular pieces would be published. Some of Stephen Foster's songs, clearly 50,000, maybe 100,000 of certain songs were published. Sadly, Stephen gave away the rights too cheaply, which is a big reason he died penniless. But the first million seller, what was the first case of a piece of music having 1 million copies printed? That was not until 1894, Charles K. Harris, After the Ball. So it did take that long to get up to that number. And then in the 20th century, you had multiple items that were printed in multiple millions.
One of the challenges of researching sheet music publishing is there's not a lot of archival records of the publishers themselves that I've seen. And to some degree, I've wondered if this wasn't deliberate on behalf of the publishers, who were moving quickly, making a lot of money, and hiding information from the artists so that they wouldn't have to pay royalties at the full rate. And so for historians, this leaves a conundrum where you're trying to research something where there just isn't a lot of information. but the little bit that I've seen indicates that it was very profitable. I think it's significant that during the Civil War in the South, after book printing had been suspended and newspaper printing was disappearing, publishers were still printing sheet music in the South during the Civil War. It must have been profitable and important to them.
There were hundreds of pieces printed in southern cities during the war, hundreds. I forget the exact number. I mean, it has been, all chronicled. I don't know, 800, I can't remember now. Not as many as in the North, where there were thousands, obviously, printed. But, Stephen Foster's publisher paid him for some of his most popular songs 2 cents per copy. That's all he got. So if the song sold 100,000 copies at 25 cents, 30 cents per copy, you can see how publishers did fairly well.
So let's see. Oh, interesting. Cheryl is sort of commenting, in the early 20th century sheet music, the performing artist was an additional way of gathering attention as performed or recorded by, and we saw that on some of the Jenny Lind pieces.
Yes, and
that's a very interesting point.
In the 20th century, they would have a little square, lower right or left, and you would see it's a little photograph of the person who sang the song. So they were getting pushed as well as the song itself. And if the individual was famous, it was Burt Williams or it was one of the other famous singers of the area of the time, then it was helpful in terms of selling the piece.
To some degree, the song would ride the coattails of the popularity of the performer.
Yes, that's right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So Sandy's saying, when was the current written music system established, when and where?
Oh, I don't know the answer to that one. That's for a musicologist,
Yeah.
which I am not.
The current written music system. What do you mean specifically by that? Do you know?
Musical notation as we know it now. I don't know when it began.
Oh, I would send you to the Piccolomini Library in Siena, the Duomo in Siena, Italy. Walk into the Piccolomini Library in an alcove off to the left. The entire room, walls, ceiling covered with designs that accompany musical notation. And they have the early books there done in the 1470s with beautiful music notation, just all gorgeously done via manuscript and coloring. It's just unbelievable. So that's 1470.
Interesting. Let's see. Tom is asking, does some published music become more popular when the lyrics are changed or updated?
That's a good question. Dixie, written by a Northerner, right? Who went on record saying, if I knew what it was going to be put, how it was going to be put to use, I never would have written it. Daniel Decatur Emmett said. But in the South, it was so popular that there were all kinds of editions, where they rewrote it with the tune, with new lyrics. And that followed Yankee Doodle, which was rewritten many times with new lyrics. So it's part of the interesting study of music, is to see how these very popular songs had these lifetimes with different lyrics.
Right.
Good question. Yeah.
Rex is asking, does anyone know a good history of the Little Cannonmall River?
Cannonmall River. I don't.
Well, certainly for the Johnstown flood, there's David McCullough's book on the flood. That's a very readable one.
He did a book on the flood, on the Johnstown flood?
One of his first, I think, yeah.
Wow.
All right, nice. And Tom is asking a couple of questions about what the music sounds like, wondering if you can hear and imagine the music in your head, and then also just wondering what music about a disaster sounds like.
Yes, that's a very good question. Now, I don't read music, and I gave up the piano long ago. So it's hard for me to hear it. I know some of the popular songs, obviously, so I know those melodies. But I think back to Lester Levy, the great collector who started collecting in the 1930s, built a phenomenal collection that is at Johns Hopkins University now, the Eisenhower Library. He would do demonstrations. He actually would do lectures at Johns Hopkins where he would have a pianist right there. Well, the Peabody School isn't the Peabody, yeah, right there at Johns Hopkins. And he would have somebody play the tune, and then they would project it and you could see the cover. And so you not only saw the iconography, but you heard the music as well. So that's an ideal way to do a presentation.
Now, this is before my time, but Clayton, I understand that we had done some presentations with our
Yes,
sheet.
the Clements has hosted musical performances in the past. Yes, it is part of our history. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's interesting. And we do have, I know one of our interns also was kind enough to sing one of the pieces that she had digitized for us a couple years ago.
That's right. Alex Broussard was a vocal student at the University of Michigan School of Music, and she was working on the digitization of our sheet music. And it was terrific to have a vocal performer checking our cataloging.
Yeah, that was a nice way to tie several things together. And by the way, if anyone who's still on is interested, we have a lot more sheet music at the Clements to digitize. So it's a potential philanthropic funding opportunity if anybody is interested. We loved having an intern work on that project. It was really great. So let's see, where are we now? Alan's asking us to comment on the role of sheet music in promoting slavery and racism.
This is an enormous question, Alan. Thank you for asking it. Certainly, American popular music has its roots in African American music to a large degree. This is really particularly true in the 19th century. Kevin, is it safe to say that the dominant musical style of the 19th century in America was the minstrel music that was derivative of early African American music?
Yes, you could call it America's first indigenous music. And it is interesting how some of the instruments did come from Africa, like the banjo. Initially it was a gourd, right? With the strings. My gosh, I don't know how they made the strings. But that was an African instrument. And the bones also may have come from Africa that were part of a minstrel group performance, playing the bones. To answer the question as best I can, most of the publications regarding slavery had to do with abolition and the abolishment of slavery rather than the promotion of it. It was mostly.
Although I would say the minstrel style as a derogatory stereotype sort of promoted a racist opinion of blacks.
No question.
And this was powerful and ubiquitous in our society, very visible. But yes, songs like the one you showed, The Negro Boatman, was really an abolition song.
Yeah, there's no question that the stereotypes had an oppressive impact on Black America long after the slaves were freed in 1863, long after black males got the vote in 1868, these stereotypes of Jim Crow and Zip Coon, of the ne'er-do-well, and the dandy, the urban dandy. I mean, they were very oppressive stereotypes, and they continued all the way through that century into the 20th century. And then finally, we wound up with the Jim Crow laws in the middle part of the 20th century. So it was very oppressive. There's no questioning that. Minstrelsy was also very popular. It was a very popular form for many years.
Thank you. Any recommendations? Debbie's asking about Jenny Lind biographies.
Yeah, Porter Ware, W-A-R-E, did a wonderful book on Jenny Lind's tours. Fortunately, I have it right here. And here it is. P.T. Barnum presents Jenny Lind, the American tour of the Swedish Nightingale. And this will give you all sorts of wonderful facts and figures and anecdotes. And the anecdotes are absolutely amazing. They really are. What happened on this tour? They went all the way down to Cuba, nearly died, in a horrible storm, going to Wilmington, Carolina. Lots of amazing things happen on this tour. So this is the book I would recommend. Porter Ware.
Thank you. Let's see. Okay, so Elise is asking, the Hadley Township Mill Museum has a small collection of World War I era sheet music, popular songs. As the volunteer archivist for our little museum, I'd like to know where I could find some resources that could provide background information on music of this type.
I know a wonderful World War I collector. In terms of resources, though, for World War I sheet music, there was a lot of it printed.
Does the Lester Levy collection include a lot of World War I stuff?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And that's an online collection for the most part.
Right. You just have.
You and I have talked about how clumsy the interface is, but it's still a great collection behind that.
It is. All you have to do is Google Lester Levy, L-E-V-Y, Lester Levy sheet music. And that will put you into the online collection, and then search for World War I. And that should turn up probably hundreds of examples, I would think.
It was a boom of patriotic music in the US, and some of the covers are fantastic.
Yeah, even then, very colorful. A lot of color came back in the 1890s as music printing turned from stone lithography to photo illustration and other means of publishing. And then a lot of color came back, but the paper wasn't the same and the inks weren't the same,
That's true. But you get some great illustrators like Norman Rockwell did, I think, the cover for Over There.
He did a few on sheet music covers. Maxfield Parrish, a little later, did one sheet music cover. I'm still looking for Alphonse Mucha, as some people believe Mucha did. The great Art Nouveau illustrator, the Czech, did some covers. So World War I is a great study through American music publication.
Nice. Thank you. Let's see. Rex is asking, Clayton, can you compare the lithography of American magazines in the 19th century? My point of comparison would be French and Spanish language magazines. Why, by the turn of the century, were very beautifully done by the literary printing industry. Perhaps we have lost a lot in technique since the 1920s.
Oh, that's a great question, Rex. I'm not an expert on European magazine printing, but I think compared to the sheet music cover printing, yes, there was a huge quality difference in what you saw on many American magazines compared to American sheet music, with the sheet music showing a lot more investment in the illustrations and the lithography. And the peak of American magazine cover art comes later in the 20th century with magazines like Fortune and so, where they had the brilliantly designed covers. That's an interesting point, but yeah, what do you think, Kevin? How familiar are you with 19th century American magazine covers?
There were some nice ones that began as early as the 1840s that had color illustrations. I know that. U.S. military magazine, and I forget the exact nature, but they had a wonderful fellow working for them, a lithographer by the last name of Huddy, Huddy, did a few music covers. But some very fine work was done. I can't vouch to the quality of the paper because I haven't seen these periodicals. But typically in all periodicals, the paper quality just was not what it was in some of the folio sheet music creations.
Right, right. So along those lines, Paul is asking, would large music publishers have their own lithographers and engravers working in-house, or was that work done by outside firms?
That's a good question. And I wish I had a complete answer for it. I don't, but I do know that they did, in fact, have very close ties to certain lithographers. So you would see Lee and Walker as a music publisher in Philadelphia. So much of what they did over a 20-year period was done by Thomas Sinclair's lithography. And so many of those were done by a particular artist. Whately was his name. And he lives in infamy in a way, because he's the one guy that wouldn't, when he put his name on the lithographs, wouldn't do it backwards. So when it printed backwards. That it came off that way. So you'll see Whately's name spelled backwards on a number of music lithographs. He just didn't care, apparently.
It was a time when many of these artists were independent contractors that did the actual artwork on the printing stone, and then the printer was a different outfit that may have also been a different business from the publisher. So you may have had a number of different parties involved in the production of a single piece, all of them making something along the way.
Yes, somebody could sketch the initial design. Someone else could actually put it on the stone, draw it on the stone, which is just a wonderful process to explore, stone lithography. Someone else could actually be running the lithographic press, probably was someone else. And then, on and on it would go. More people would be involved. So your point is well taken.
Right, right. Thank you. I missed this one earlier, but Alan was asking, what is the date of the women's rights piece? And I know we had more than one that we looked at.
Women's rights that was non-pictorial but had the engraved cover with all, that was 1853. So I mentioned there had been that year a women's rights convention in New York. It was somewhat unruly, and it's possible that gave birth to this piece. I don't know. But it's a thread, isn't it? You can't necessarily prove it. But 1853 was the date.
Thank you. Thanks. All right. We definitely used our time well this morning and covered a lot of ground, and we still have a lot of people who stuck with us, and I want to thank them all so much. This has been an amazing conversation, and I've learned so much, not just about sheet music, but about some events in history as well.
The questions are excellent. Thank you for anyone that submitted a question.
Thanks everybody for hanging in there as well. I know we ran a bit long today, but the illumination of these designs, is very infectious, and once you get started on it, you can talk for a long time.
Well, we definitely enjoyed it. And I think, it's another situation where we see the layers of these objects and how much we can learn from them. So thank you very much, Clayton, for hosting, and Kevin for sharing just the most amazing pieces today from your wonderful collection. And have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
as
Kevin.
well. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.